Even though the casket was a treasure, he couldn't use it. Because his physical strength was still too weak, he couldn't lift the casket. But it was fine because he felt that so long as he cultivated the undying elemental body technique and improved his body to the undying realm, then his physical strength would definitely be sufficient to use the ice casket. Based on its weight and strength, it would definitely be sufficient for him to use for at least 10 years. Because he couldn't move it, Xianxia asked Little Sky to help him. Once she found out that he wanted it, she acted very generously and gave it to him, and she even helped him move it into the primordial pagoda. The favorable impression Xianxia had of Little Sky instantly skyrocketed. What a nice person! Xianxia really was grateful, because the ice casket was definitely an extraordinary treasure. But Little Sky had been so generous and given it to him without even a moment's hesitation. She was a really nice person, could be considered as being repaid for doing good. Earlier, if he became enemies with Little Sky, then not to mention anything else that might happen, he would definitely be unable to obtain the ice casket. After the ice casket was within the primordial pagoda, Xianxia continued forward. According to his estimations, he would be arriving at the Forest of Darkness soon. The Spring of Life. The objective he'd entered the ominous territory with was the Spring of Life. Once he got it, he could relax for some time. If he couldn't get it, then he would be in big trouble. Even though he'd lost lifespan in the past, it hadn't been very serious. He had time to advance in his cultivation. But this time, he'd utilized the stellar sword diagram right after he attained the Voider realm. Moreover, he'd lost too much lifespan at once. That made him utterly unable to rely on cultivating to improve his strength and advance to a higher realm of cultivation. He'd just advanced to the Voider realm yet had to advance to the semi-deity realm. It was absolutely impossible to accomplish something so heaven-defying, even if he had the primordial pagoda. After all, cultivating wasn't like eating. An advancement couldn't be accomplished just because he wanted it. Even though the ancient Emperor Python had joined his side, Xianxia still didn't dare to act carelessly. This place was very mysterious, and the people or demon beasts he encountered here were either too strong or too mysterious. Even the slightest carelessness might result in suffering calamity. After walking for around 4 hours, Xianxia finally left the ice mountain. Perhaps it was because of Little Sky, but he hadn't encountered any danger all along the way. He'd encountered a few white bears along the way, but they just glared angrily at him and didn't attack. Once he left the ice mountain, the miasma appeared once more, and it was even thicker than before. Miasma. Needless to say, it was an extremely detestable thing. He believed that the miasma played a huge role in why many humans hadn't been able to return from the ominous territory. The miasma could obstruct vision and divine sense. So, it created a huge problem for the experts that entered the ominous territory, especially those who frequently relied on their divine sense. They would truly become blind and deaf when they came here. However, the miasma didn't affect demon beasts here too severely, because they'd grown up here, so they were used to it. Thus, the humans were at a complete disadvantage here. Of course, even if the miasma was gone, the humans wouldn't be able to gain an advantage here. All the demon beasts here were extremely strong, and every one of them was stranger than the last. Actually, as far as Xianxia was concerned, even the so-called large world may not be as terrifying as this place. Xianxia restrained his thoughts and sped up. No matter how terrifying this place was, he still had to go forward. After walking for a long time, Xianxia suddenly noticed that the miasma here was actually growing fainter, so Xianxia sped up. After walking around an hour more, Xianxia noticed the miasma in the surroundings had actually become almost indistinct. At the same time, a small village had appeared not too far ahead. The village was built against a mountain, and it only had over a dozen houses. Moreover, the houses were spread far apart like there were misunderstandings between the owners. Besides that, the houses seemed very old. A village. Xianxia frowned because it was very unusual for a village to appear here. Should I go in? Of course I shouldn't. Curiosity killed the cat. He didn't want to court death and bring trouble upon himself. However, right when Xianxia was about to go around, a hand suddenly pressed down on his shoulder. Xianxia's expression changed slightly. He stopped but didn't turn around. He pondered deeply for a few moments, and then he asked, "What?" He received no reply. Xianxia frowned and continued forward on his path to go around the village. However, the palm suddenly pressed down, and a mysterious force instantly descended upon him, causing him to be unable to move another step forward. Xianxia shook his head. "Come on. Is it that difficult to say something?" Meanwhile, the hand on his shoulder suddenly raised its index finger, and it pointed at the small village. Xianxia understood that the mysterious woman wanted him to enter the village. She has been following me so that I would enter the village? Xianxia thought for a moment and said, "Can I refuse to go in?" His intuition told him that nothing good would come of going inside the village. She didn't speak, but she waved her finger slightly. Obviously, she was saying no. Xianxia asked, "Is it dangerous?" She didn't answer, nor did her finger move. So, it meant that it was dangerous. Xianxia fell silent, and the woman didn't urge him forward. However, every single time he wanted to walk, so long as it wasn't in the direction of the village, then she would immediately stop him and immobilize him. Xianxia spoke solemnly. "What do you want me to do there? Can you tell me in detail?" She didn't answer him. Suddenly, Xianxia turned around. He was extremely swift, but there was no one behind him when he turned around. However, the strange thing was that the woman's hand was still on his shoulder. Xianxia spoke in a low voice. "What exactly do you want me to do in there?" He received no answer. Xianxia shook his head. "I won't go in unless you tell me everything. After all, if it was a trap, then wouldn't he be walking into it?" She didn't say anything, and her hand just remained on his shoulder. Xianxia fell silent. He had the desire to attack. However, he was very well aware that it was very likely that he lost. She was too mysterious. If he couldn't kill her with a single strike, then she would definitely become his nightmare. Because if she hid in the shadows and launched a surprise attack on him, then he would be absolutely incapable of defending himself against it. Especially when he couldn't rashly activate the sword domain. Bad luck. Absolutely bad luck. Needless to say, meeting her was absolute bad luck. He couldn't fight her, nor could he flee. Even he didn't really know what to do. After standing there for a long time, the mysterious woman's hand suddenly moved to his back, and then it started to move around on his back. She was writing. A short while passed before her hand stopped, and Xianxia understood what she wanted. Help. She'd written that on his back. Xianxia wasn't surprised because she'd definitely been following him for a reason, but he didn't know her, so she was obviously seeking help from him. Xianxia remained silent for an instant and asked, "Help you with what?" Her hand started moving again. However, she wrote the same thing. "Help." Xianxia asked, "Will you stop following me if I help?" She wrote a single word on his back. "Yes." Xianxia remained silent for a long time, and then he said, "Fine, I'll help you." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and started walking towards the village. Actually, he didn't want to help. Why? His intuition told him that it would be that easy. But he had no other choice. He had to help even if he didn't want to. Otherwise, she would definitely not let him leave. And it just so happened that he was helpless against her. That made him feel quite depressed. Xianxia walked step by step towards the village. The village felt similar to that woman, mysterious. There weren't any signs of life within the village, nor were there any sounds coming from the village. It was a scene of complete desolation. In short, the more he looked at it, the more off it felt. If he was in the outside world, he would have nothing to fear. However, this was the ominous territory. Deities were everywhere in this place. As he got closer and closer to the village, Xianxia's profound energy started to surge while a vigilant expression crept up on his face. At this moment, he'd used the sword domain to conceal himself. Even then, he still didn't dare to act carelessly. It didn't take long for Xianxia to arrive at the entrance of the village. Spirit Village. The characters were written above the entrance. Spirit Village? Xianxia frowned, and then he continued forward. As soon as he entered the village, a gust of cold wind assaulted him. Even though it was cold, it didn't affect Xianxia much. However, the arrival of the cold wind was too much of a coincidence. Yang Yi didn't dare act carelessly as he continued forward. The path was completely silent and without any cold wind. However, Yang Yi sensed a strand of ghastly coldness. Because there was no miasma here, Yang Yi slowly released his divine sense. It didn't take long for it to sweep through the houses. In the end, he noticed that they were empty. An empty village? Yang Yi frowned. Suddenly, the mysterious woman placed her palm on his shoulder. And then she lifted a finger and pointed ahead. Obviously, she wanted him to continue forward. Yang Yi fell silent for an instant, and then he continued forward. All along the way, he ceaselessly scanned the houses with his divine sense. However, he didn't notice any person or demon beast. At this moment, he was certain that this village was empty. At this moment, he was really quite curious. He was curious about what she wanted him to help with. He had no doubt about her strength. If she wasn't strong, then it would have been impossible for her to survive in the ominous territory. However, since her strength was so terrifying, then why did she need his help? Yang Yi couldn't figure that out no matter how he racked his brains. But it couldn't be helped because she couldn't talk to him. Or it should be said that she merely wanted him to continue forward, and she refused to tell him anything else. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to walk out of the village under her guidance, and he started walking towards the mountain behind the village. During this period, Yang Yi had tried to ask her what she wanted him to do. However, he received no answer. So, he had no other choice but to continue forward. After walking for a while, Yang Yi suddenly stopped, and then he looked up into the distance while disbelief filled his eyes. What the heck is all of that? Many figures were hanging from a mountain wall not too far ahead from Yang Yi. There were both men and women of all ages, and there were around 100 of them. All of them wore snow-white robes. The mountain wall behind them was densely covered in symbols that formed a circle, and all the figures were within that circle. The symbols were spinning according to a certain pattern, and threads of dark brown energy were surging incessantly towards the people within the circle. Yang Yi noticed that their eyes were closed. They weren't dead and seemed to be in deep sleep. Who are they? Why are they trapped here? Yang Yi frowned. Suddenly, the palm on his shoulder moved to his back, and then it started to move. Save. She'd merely written a single word, and it was save. Yang Yi gazed at the symbols and fell silent. Save them? It's absolutely not that simple. If it was just that, then based on the strength she possesses, she probably wouldn't need my help. But she wants my help. That's very unusual. Suddenly, the woman's hand started to move on his back again. Please. This time, she wrote a single word as well, and it was please. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time, and then he flicked a strand of sword energy towards the circle of symbols. However, as soon as it arrived around 10 m from the symbols, the circle started to revolve swiftly, and then a beam of light suddenly surged out from it. The beam of light was extremely swift and instantly slammed against Yang Ye's sword energy. Bang! The sword energy shattered, but the beam of light hadn't vanished and instantly arrived in front of Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he slammed his fist forward. However, as soon as he did, the circle of symbols suddenly started spinning rapidly, and then numerous beams of light rained down upon Yang Yi. Yang Ye's expression changed, and his quasi-returnal rank sword intent and slaughter intent surged out from his body before slamming against the beams of light. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then Yang Yi was pushed backwards repeatedly. In an instant, Yang Yi had been pushed back into the village. As soon as he stopped himself, his expression changed once more because he noticed to his astonishment that a dense expanse of symbols which looked like the symbols on the mountain wall had suddenly appeared beneath his feet. Yang Yi swept them with his divine sense, and he noticed that the ground of the entire village was covered in such symbols. Yang Yi thought to himself, crap. Sure enough, the symbols beneath his feet and the symbols on the distant mountain wall started to spin madly. A moment later, countless beams of light shot out from the mountain wall. At the same time, countless beams of light shot out from the ground throughout the village. The beams of light shot up into the air and lit up the entire sky. The beams of light had surged out continuously for around an hour before they gradually vanished. and another hour passed before the symbols were back to spinning at their initial speed. At this moment, an ice casket had appeared at the center of Spirit Village. A short while passed before the lid was slowly opened, and then Xianxia sat up within it. Xianxia couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when he saw that the beams of light had vanished. After all, he'd almost died just now. Those beams of light were extremely powerful. Every single one was on par with an attack that carried the full strength of a deity. If he hadn't told Little Sky to bring out the casket at the critical moment, then he would have definitely been blasted into bits. What formation is that? Is that terrifying? Even though he was very curious, Xianxia didn't have the time to think about that. Xianxia made Little Sky put the ice casket back into the primordial pagoda, and then he turned around and walked away. However, right when he was about to leave Spirit Village, the hand appeared on his shoulder again and refused to let him leave. Xianxia took a deep breath and said, "I'm sure you saw that. I can't resist that formation at all. So, I'm sorry. Even though I want to help you save them, I'm really helpless." The hand moved to his back and started to write. "You can." Those were the words that she'd written. "Are you kidding?" Xianxia was quite annoyed. "You saw that. I was almost blasted into bits. Please, big sis, please go find someone else, all right? I'm really unable to help with this." Being generous and helping others depended on the situation. This matter had clearly exceeded his ability. If it wasn't for the ice casket, he would have definitely died. However, it allowed him to determine that the ice casket was much stronger than he'd imagined, because it was actually fine after being struck by that many beams of light. It really was an extraordinary treasure. A short moment of silence ensued before the woman's palm started moving on Xianxia's back again. This time it was more words. "You'll be compensated." "I'll be compensated?" Xianxia was slightly stunned. He hadn't expected her to actually start trying to tempt him. He thought for a moment and shook his head. "Compensation had nothing to do with it. I'm serious. If it was within my ability, then I would even help you for free. However, it has exceeded the scope of my ability." "Right, what is the compensation you spoke of?" "I'm just asking." Meanwhile, her hand started to move again. Xianxia's face gradually became solemn, because she said that the compensation was even better than his ice casket. It's even better? Needless to say, Xianxia was quite tempted. He'd personally witnessed how formidable the ice casket was, but she'd actually said that the compensation she was willing to give him was even better. So, didn't that mean that the treasure was comparable to the sword precursor? After all, the ice casket was only slightly inferior to the sword precursor. A treasure that surpasses the known ranks of quality. Xianxia was really tempted. However, the formation was too terrifying. Xianxia thought for a long time and then he shook his head in the end. While the treasure was great, he needed to be alive to enjoy it. The formation was clearly left behind by an extraordinary expert, and based on his current strength, even two overlapped heaven wrens may not be able to destroy it. Most importantly, the formation extended throughout the surroundings. So, once he attacked, the entire formation would be activated. Suddenly, the hand released Xianxia's shoulder. Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief because she seemed to have given up. Suddenly, a pearl appeared in front of him, and then Xianxia hadn't even been able to see it clearly before the tiny vortex within him spun and instantly sucked it into the primordial pagoda. Xianxia was stunned. Xianxia immersed his consciousness into his body. He'd just entered the primordial pagoda when he saw Little Sky, and the pearl was floating in front of her. Xianxia glanced at Little Sky, who was carefully observing the pearl, and then his gaze descended onto it. The pearl was only fist-sized, and pure white energy was flowing on it. It seemed like a luminescent pearl of the mortal world, and based on its outer appearance, there was nothing special about it. However, even the primordial pagoda hadn't hesitated to seize it, so could it be ordinary? Xianxia asked, "What is that?" "A spirit pearl." She gazed at Xianxia. "Where did you get it?" "It's an absolute treasure." Xianxia hurriedly asked, "It is? What can it do?" Little Sky asked, "You've heard of spirit veins, right?" Xianxia nodded. "Of course." She asked another question. "Then do you know what's the best spirit vein?" Divine-grade spirit veins? Asked Xianxia. That was the best spirit vein he knew of. She shook her head. No, it's the spirit pearl. Xianxia was astounded. That's a spirit vein? She nodded. It isn't an ordinary spirit vein. It's a spirit pearl. Moreover, it isn't an ordinary spirit pearl. I've taken a look at it, and it possesses spirit energy equivalent to the spirit energy within an entire large world. An entire large world. Xianxia suddenly interrupted her. Are you joking? Such a small pearl possesses the spirit energy of an entire large world. She thought for a moment and added, it might be even more. Xianxia was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, Little Sky continued, do you know how precious spirit energy is? Especially once you attain the deity realm. You'll need a tremendous amount of spirit energy to complete an advancement, and it's worse for the realms above the deity realm. Every single advancement requires the spirit energy of a few dozen worlds. That's why everyone is fighting to seize worlds. Because the more worlds they have, the greater their chances are to succeed at an advancement in their cultivation. She gazed at Xianxia and continued, now that you have this pearl, you don't have to worry about spirit energy for a very, very long time. Spirit energy. Xianxia was rather disappointed. He didn't really care about spirit energy, and he cared more about things like the sword precursor and ice casket that could improve his strength. Little Sky seemed to know what Xianxia was thinking and added, you know, even the combined value of that sword of yours and the casket can't compare to this pearl. Xianxia was puzzled. Why? Little Sky grinned. You have no idea how much spirit energy you'll need. In the future, spirit energy will be your foundation. It'll be your life. Xianxia replied, isn't there a lot of spirit energy? There is. Little Sky's face suddenly dimmed down. But no matter how much there is, it can't endure being madly seized by the humans and other races. Your human race and all the other races only know how to take. Once this world is empty, you go to the next world. Moreover, spirit energy isn't endless, and the day will come when it vanishes. She gazed at Xianxia and said, have you seen what happens to worlds without spirit energy? Xianxia glanced at her and asked, didn't you lose your memories? She nodded, but there are many things that just suddenly appear in my mind. Xianxia felt speechless. A world without spirit energy is like a desert. It's very desolate and sad. She spoke softly. The present enjoys, and the future suffers. Xianxia glanced at her. This little girl seems to pity the state of the universe. Meanwhile, she pushed the pearl to Xianxia and said, take good care of it. It's your fortune. This pearl doesn't just possess spirit energy, and it has many other uses. You'll slowly discover them in the future. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around, placed her hands behind her back, and floated off into the distance. Suddenly, Xianxia vanished on the spot. Xianxia opened his eyes in the outside world because the woman's hand had descended onto his shoulder again. Moreover, she'd pushed him lightly. Obviously, she was telling him to hurry up and save them. Xianxia's face became quite unsightly because he noticed that he was actually unable to withdraw the pearl from within the primordial pagoda. The primordial pagoda was afraid that he would return it to her. So he had a problem now. The primordial pagoda had taken the pearl, yet he had to do the saving. He had to save them. That was a huge problem. If it was before the pearl, then he could have chosen to refuse. Yet now he had to save them no matter what. After all, the primordial pagoda had taken her pearl. But the problem was, how would he save them? Once the formation was activated, he would be blasted into bits before he even got close to the wall. Xianxia remained silent for an instant, and then he said, let me think of a way, all right? As soon as he finished speaking, she immediately released her grip on his shoulder. Obviously, she was willing to give him time. Xianxia immersed his consciousness into his body, and then he started talking with the primordial pagoda. Brother, you've taken her pearl, so you can't just stand by idly. Think of a way to help her. The primordial pagoda didn't answer. Xianxia's face darkened, and then he said, you can do nothing if you want. Just return the pearl to her. Then we don't have to do anything. He still received no reply. Yang Yi tried to take the pearl. However, it just wouldn't come out of the primordial pagoda. Obviously, the primordial pagoda did it. Yang Ye's face was quite unsightly. This fellow took the compensation but refuses to do anything. How shameless! No matter what he tried, the primordial pagoda refused to answer him. In the end, Yang Yi had no choice but to give up on gaining help from the primordial pagoda, and he went to look for Little Sky. She gazed at the symbols for a long time, and then she spoke seriously. You should be able to destroy it once you attain the deity realm. As soon as she finished speaking, she ran back into the primordial pagoda. Yang Ye's figure stiffened on the spot. The deity realm? I know I can do that at the deity realm, but the problem is that I'm only a voider right now. I'm still 2 realms of cultivation away from the deity realm. Yet now, he had to save those people. After all, he'd taken the pearl from her. So, it was unacceptable if he refused to save them now. Moreover, she would definitely not let him go. But how would he save them? Fortunately, the heavens help those who try. Yang Yi finally thought of a way that wasn't really a way to deal with the formation. Yang Yi went over to the mountain wall. He gazed at the symbols for a long time, and then he pressed the index and middle finger on his right hand together. He waved it slightly, and a strand of sword energy shot forward from the tip of his fingers. It was extremely swift and instantly struck the circle of symbols. Bang! A beam of light shot out from the mountain wall and instantly destroyed Yang Ye's sword energy. At the same time, countless beams of light surged out incessantly like a storm. Moreover, a dense expanse of such beams shot up from the village as well, and they shot towards Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyelids twitched, and then he told Little Sky to bring the ice casket out. After that, he hid within it. Bang! 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 Numerous explosions resounded. Around an hour later, Yang Yi sat up in the casket. At this moment, the circle of symbols had returned to normal. Yang Yi fell silent for an instant, and then he flicked another strand of sword energy towards the circle of symbols. After that, he hurriedly laid back down in the casket. Meanwhile, the formation was activated again, and then countless beams of light appeared. Once everything returned to normal again, Yang Yi sat up again, and then he flicked another strand of sword energy over to activate the formation. After that, he laid back down into the casket again. He was exhausting its energy. The method Yang Yi had come up with was to exhaust the energy within the formation. The formation was an inanimate object, and there would be a time when all the spirit energy within it was exhausted. Especially this formation, it definitely exhausted a tremendous amount of spirit energy. So, Yang Yi intended to exhaust all the spirit energy within it, and once it was fully exhausted, the formation would be useless. Needless to say, this method was quite shameless. Moreover, it exhausted a huge amount of time. However, it couldn't be helped. It was the only method he could think of, because his strength couldn't resist the might of the formation at all. Actually, he was probably the only one capable of utilizing such a method, because he had the ice casket, and it could resist the attacks from the formation. Otherwise, if it was anyone else, then unless that person's strength was on par with the person that created the formation, trying to go head-on against it was. In any case, Yang Yi felt that even the rock titans of Rock Mountain wouldn't be able to resist the insane barrage of attacks from the formation. But the ice casket could. Moreover, the most terrifying part was that he wasn't able to feel the attacks at all while he laid within the casket. He didn't even feel the slightest shaking. Its defenses were too terrifying. At this moment, he grew even more curious about little Tion's identity and background. She knew a huge number of things, a very huge number. Moreover, she could gain information about anyone she wanted to gain information about. That was even more terrifying than the defensive capabilities of the ice casket. Fortunately, there was something wrong with her ability, and she could only obtain some information. Otherwise, it would be even more terrifying, because anyone who stood before her would seem completely translucent in her eyes. The most terrifying part was that the demon beasts gave her face. Even the proud, ancient Emperor Python gave her face. After all, that fellow hadn't chosen to submit even before the primordial pagoda. However, She'd merely spoken a few words and made it submit. No matter what, he felt that forming a good relationship with Little Sky was definitely not a bad decision. There were no further explosions in the outside world, so Yang Yi sat up once more and gazed at the circle of symbols. At this moment, the symbols had dimmed down slightly. Yang Yi was delighted by the sight of it because he knew that his plan was working. Actually, he was still quite worried before this. He was worried that the formation had something which could ceaselessly provide it with spirit energy. If that was the case, then he would be in trouble. Fortunately, the formation wasn't like that. In other words, he just had to continue exhausting the energy it had, and then it would be destroyed. When he thought up to this point, Yang Yi flicked another strand of sword energy towards the mountain wall. Just like before, it was obliterated before it could even strike the circle of symbols. Yang Yi hurriedly hid within the casket when he saw that. Rumble. Explosions resounded incessantly in the world outside. Actually, all the explosions were caused by the beams of light that were striking the ice casket. However, Yang Yi wasn't able to feel the collision at all, and he could only feel slight vibrations when he tried to observe carefully. At this moment, Yang Yi felt that the celestial demon hegemon body was nothing before the ice casket. The only sad thing was that his physical strength wasn't sufficient, so he still couldn't lift the casket. Otherwise, if he could use it in battle, then a single swing would definitely smash his opponent. It was definitely a powerful weapon to crush his opponents. Around an hour later, Yang Yi sat up again. At this moment, the circle of symbols was even dimmer. Yang Yi was delighted. He knew that the spirit energy within it was definitely on the verge of being exhausted. Time to continue. Yang Yi shot out another strand of sword energy. Just like that, around an hour passed before Yang Yi released another strand of sword energy, and it struck against the circle of symbols. Yang Yi watched as the mountain shook violently. Even though the circle of symbols was still here, it hadn't reacted to his attack at all. Yang Yi knew that the spirit energy within the formation had been exhausted. Meanwhile, the people hanging on the mountain wall started to drop down slowly. Obviously, the mysterious woman did it. Yang Yi sized up those people. They were a little different than ordinary humans. Besides their dressing, it was their appearance. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what was different. In any case, they didn't feel like ordinary humans to him. Yang Yi didn't watch further, and he just turned around and walked away. He'd saved them, and he didn't want to be dragged into anything else. So, the important matter at hand was to immediately leave them behind. As far as he was concerned, it was better to avoid extra problems. But right when he was about to leave the village, the hand suddenly appeared on his shoulder again. Yang Yi stopped and laughed bitterly. "I've saved them. What else do you want me to do?" She moved her hand to his back and started writing. It was only a single word. "Save." Yang Yi said, "Haven't I done that?" She started writing again, but it was still the same word. "Save." As soon as she finished speaking, she grabbed his shoulder and started moving backwards. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to return to where he had been. At this moment, he understood what she meant. They were lying on the ground. Even though they were breathing, they hadn't woken up. She wanted him to wake them up. Yang Yi thought for a moment and said, "I can give it a try. However, I dare not guarantee that I can awaken them. If I fail, you have to promise that you won't force me to stay." She patted him gently on the shoulder to display her encouragement. Yang Yi nodded, and then he went over to a young girl. He placed his right hand on her head, and then the primordial violet energy within him gradually entered her mind. He didn't know what was wrong with them, but he knew that if primordial violet energy couldn't help them, then they couldn't be saved. Fortunately, after around 10 breaths of time passed, the little girl's brows twitched slightly. Yang Yi hurriedly increased the amount of primordial violet energy he was sending to her, and it didn't take long for her to open her eyes. She gazed at him, blinked, and then suddenly grabbed his hand before speaking softly, "Big brother, big brother." Hearing these words warmed Yang Ye's heart. At this moment, he thought of his younger sister. He grinned and said, "It's all right now." She held tightly to his hand as if she was afraid that he would leave. Yang Yi consoled her for a while, and then he started treating the others. Just like that, around an hour passed before everyone here had woken up. An old man with a long beard stood in front of Yang Yi, and he gazed at Yang Yi for a long time before he said, "You're human." Yang Yi glanced at the old man and said, "Aren't all of you human too?" The old man shook his head. "Of course not." Yang Yi was curious and asked, "Then what are you?" The old man didn't answer him. He just gazed at Yang Yi for a long time. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and pressed it against Yang Yi's shoulder. It was so swift that Yang Yi hadn't been able to react. Once the old man's hand descended onto his shoulder, Yang Yi instantly felt a mysterious force charge into his mind, and then his mind felt heavy before he fell unconscious. Kindness is a mistake. That was the final thought Yang Yi had before he lost consciousness. Some time later, Yang Yi opened his eyes slowly. Meanwhile, a clear and melodious voice came from his side. "You're awake." Yang Yi turned to look, and it was that young girl whom he'd saved first. She was around 13 or 14 years old, pretty but rather immature in appearance. She wore a rather loose pure white robe, and the robe made her seem even more petite. Yang Yi closed his eyes, scanned the condition of his body, and noticed that there was nothing unusual. Some time passed before he opened his eyes and looked at her. "Why did that old man act against me?" "You're talking about Grandpa Mo, right?" The young girl revealed a brilliant smile. "Grandpa Mo said that your mind was highly tense, and you needed some rest. You can really sleep. You've slept for 2 whole days. Rest." Yang Ye's face eased up slightly, so he didn't attack me. "It was because my mind was strained." Actually, the old man wasn't wrong. Since he arrived at the ominous territory, his mind had been constantly in a tense and concentrated state. It wasn't in such a state for a certain period. It was in such a state at every moment. The old man was right, and he really did need a rest. However, how could he dare to rest in the ominous territory? Only someone who was tired of living would dare to rest here. Meanwhile, the young girl took his hand and said, "Grandpa Mo told me to take you to see him once you've woken up." Yang Yi gazed at her and smiled. "What's your name?" She smiled sweetly. "Xiao Wu." Yang Yi rubbed her head and said, "Come, let's go see Grandpa Mo." Just like that, both of them left the room, and Xiao Wu guided Yang Yi to a hall that seemed to be severely damaged. In the hall, Yang Yi met the old man with a long beard again. The old man grinned. "You're awake." Yang Yi nodded and said, "Senior, there were many things that I didn't want to know. Yet now, I have a slight urge to find out." He had too many questions. For example, who the mysterious woman was, who all of them were, why they were in the ominous territory, why they'd been sealed on the mountain wall. He knew the old man could give him the answers he sought. The old man remained silent for a long time, and then he said, "We aren't human. We're from the spirit race." "The spirit race?" Yang Yi frowned. "I've never heard of it. Is it from the large world?" "The large world?" The old man was slightly stunned, and then he shook his head. "We are from a large world, but we're not from the large world in your universe." Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. "Senior, all of you aren't from this universe?" The old man grinned. "All of that isn't important. Let me finish before you ask questions. We are from the spirit race. Because of certain reasons, we were sent here. In the end, an expert found out about it, and he sealed us in order to obtain a precious treasure we possessed. A very long time ago, he would come here from time to time and ask for it. However, for some unknown reason, he stopped coming. Being sealed for such a long time forced us to go into deep sleep in order to preserve our energy." The old man paused for a moment and said, "In the end, we realized that even that wouldn't guarantee our survival, because we might be sealed until we die. So, Linger destroyed her own body, escaped the formation, and then searched for a way to save us." "Linger," Yang Yi continued. "That woman who made me come here?" The old man nodded. "Yes." A wisp of pain flashed through his eyes at this point, and he continued, "She is the most outstanding genius amongst us, and possesses a natural spirit body that's 1 in a million. If she hadn't destroyed her body, her future would be limitless. However, It couldn't be helped because she was the only one amongst us who could remain in spirit form for a long time. She's in spirit form? Xianxia frowned. Even if she's in spirit form, it's impossible for her to stop me from noticing her presence. She possesses a natural spirit body. The old man continued. It transcends the 5 elements yin and yang. Besides dead people, only those with extremely formidable strength are able to see her. Your strength isn't sufficient, and you're not dead. So you can't see her. So that's why. Xianxia nodded. Senior, there's something I don't understand. The strength of that expert who sealed all of you definitely far surpasses your spirit race. Since it's like that, then why didn't you hand it over to him in exchange for peace? The old man grinned. If we did hand it over, then you wouldn't have been able to see us now. They would be killed to keep them quiet. Xianxia came to an understanding. Meanwhile, the old man added, if we can hand it over in exchange for peace, then I wouldn't have kept that treasure. No matter how precious a treasure is, it isn't as precious as the lives of our people or Linger. However, I'm very well aware that if it falls into his hand, then the first thing he does would be to kill us. Because if news of it were to spread, then he would suffer endless trouble. Xianxia said, that treasure is the spirit pearl, right? The old man gazed at Xianxia for a long time, and then he said, she gave it to you? Xianxia nodded. The old man laughed bitterly. Actually, I guessed it. Xianxia glanced at the old man and said, Senior, you wouldn't try to take it back, right? The old man smiled. If I wanted to, I would have done it already. Xianxia smiled. That's what I was thinking. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly said, your lifespan seems to be. Xianxia nodded. I came to the ominous territory in order to gain the spring of life at the Forest of Darkness. The old man frowned. You're heading to the Forest of Darkness? Xianxia asked. What's wrong? The old man remained silent for a long time, and then he said, Kid, to be honest, it's really a miracle that you were able to get here with your strength. Senior, what sort of place is the ominous territory? Why aren't all of you leaving it? Asked Xianxia in a serious tone. He was really curious about the ominous territory, and this place was truly too mysterious. The old man shook his head. Greed is a form of original sin, something we should suffer. I only pity these little fellows that have to suffer with us. As soon as he finished speaking, he gazed at Xianxia. I can't tell you too much because it would be of no benefit to you. Since you were able to get here, getting to the Forest of Darkness shouldn't be a huge problem for you. However, you have to be careful. Once he spoke up to this point, the old man spoke in an extremely solemn voice. Don't go past Yellow Springs River. Xianxia frowned. Why? It wasn't the first time he'd heard about the Yellow Springs River. The middle-aged man he'd encountered on the way had given him a similar warning. What exactly was on the other side? Why was it so terrifying? Because you'll die there. The old man spoke solemnly. You know that person who sealed us here? Even with his strength, he didn't dare to cross Yellow Springs River. Xianxia was at a loss for words. It really isn't a place you can go to. The old man spoke in a low voice. Don't go in there out of curiosity. It'll cost you your life. Xianxia spoke solemnly. What is in there? I don't know. The old man shook his head. All I know is that many people who I felt were extremely formidable have entered that place, but none have come back out. Yet you are too weak when compared to them. Not to mention them, you can't even fight me. Xianxia's face darkened. Do you have to be that direct? Meanwhile, the old man hesitated for a moment and said, Kid, logically speaking, I should thank you for saving all of us. However, I really don't have much. Why don't all of you accompany me to the Forest of Darkness? Xianxia hurriedly said, Help me get the spring of life, all right? The old man's face froze. He'd thought that Xianxia would say something like, It's fine, it was nothing. However, he'd never expected Xianxia to say that. The old man hesitated for a moment and shook his head. No, don't look at me like that. I'm doing it for your sake. Xianxia asked, What do you mean? The old man explained. Everyone has their own territory here. If we leave our territory, it's equivalent to breaking the rules. Let me explain it like this. So long as we leave this place, then it's equivalent to entering someone else's territory. Once we enter someone else's territory, then the owner of that territory will attack us madly. If we follow you to the forest of darkness, it means that we'll have to fight our way there. But if you go alone, I believe it will be even easier. Xianxia nodded. He didn't feel like the old man was making up an excuse, because he'd experienced how abnormal those demon beasts were. So long as he entered their territory, they would immediately attack him, no matter the reason. So it was just as the old man had said. If such a huge group were to head there, then it would actually make the journey more difficult, because they would be a huge target. Actually, he was only joking earlier, because the spirit race didn't owe him anything. Even though he'd saved them, they'd compensated him, and it wasn't a small amount of compensation. In short, they didn't owe each other anything. Meanwhile, the old man said, If you get the spring of life, then can you come back here? Xianxia asked, Why? I need your help for a small thing. The old man smiled. It's a very small thing. Of course, you'll be compensated. Xianxia thought for a while and replied, All right. The old man's smile grew wider. He flipped his palm, and a thumb-sized pearl appeared on his palm. He passed it over to Xianxia and said, It's an energy pearl. It can replenish the spirit energy within your dantian once. It should be helpful to you. What a treasure. Xianxia's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly took it before he asked, Do you have more? Give me a few more, all right? The corners of the old man's mouth twitched, and then he smiled spuriously. It's very precious. I don't have more for now. However, if you come back here, then I can give you a few more. Xianxia hurriedly nodded. All right, I'll definitely come back. The old man was at a loss for words. Xianxia didn't stay longer in Spirit Village. Once he said his farewells to the long-bearded old man, the village leader Imoku, Xianxia immediately left Spirit Village and continued forward. Once he was done with the mysterious woman, Xianxia really felt much lighter, because he didn't have to worry about someone being behind him at all times. However, a hand suddenly appeared on his shoulder. That hand again. Xianxia's figure stiffened, and then he laughed bitterly. Miss Mo Ling, don't tell me you still need something? Imoku had told him that the mysterious woman's name was Mo Ling. Mo Ling moved her hand to Xianxia's back, and then she started writing. Thank you. Just 2 words. Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief when he realized that she just wanted to express her gratitude. He was really afraid that she would ask him to help with another troublesome matter. Fortunately, it wasn't the case. Xianxia smiled and said, It was nothing. Moreover, I took a treasure from you. So there's no need to thank me. See you next time. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia was about to leave. Meanwhile, Mo Ling's hand started moving on his back again. This time, she wrote 4 words. I'll wait for you. Xianxia was stunned. Wait for me? What does she mean? Xianxia was about to ask when her hand suddenly vanished. Xianxia didn't ask the question because he knew that she was gone. She'll wait for me? Xianxia couldn't figure it out no matter how he racked his brains. Why is she waiting for me? Has she fallen for me? Xianxia shook his head and rejected such an absurd thought. If it was in the past, then it might really be possible. After all, he felt that he was quite great. Yet now, because of his lifespan, he had white hair and looked very old. So, how could she have possibly fallen for him? However, it wasn't absolutely certain. After all, who could dictate destiny? Xianxia was confident in himself. Xianxia continued forward while drunk with self-satisfaction. He didn't try to figure out what Mo Ling meant, because if he couldn't return from the forest of darkness, then he would have wasted his time thinking about it. The important matter at hand was to get to the forest of darkness and obtain the spring of life. Otherwise, everything else would be meaningless. After walking for quite some time, Xianxia suddenly stopped because he felt something was off. Logically speaking, he should be at the forest of darkness by now. However, not to mention a forest, he hadn't even seen a tree. Xianxia hesitated for a moment before he summoned Big Blackie. The reason he hadn't summoned the ancient Emperor Python was because that fellow had been imprisoned for thousands of years, so it would have probably not even heard of the Forest of Darkness. Xianxia gazed at Big Blackie and asked, "Where's the Forest of Darkness?" Big Blackie didn't hesitate to turn and point towards the distance. It was the same direction which Xianxia was traveling towards. He was on the right track. Xianxia asked, "Then why haven't we gotten there after traveling for so long?" He was afraid of getting lost. After all, getting lost here was fatal. Big Blackie shook its head and started to wave its claw about. A long time passed before Xianxia understood what Big Blackie meant. It didn't know the Forest of Darkness' exact location. It had merely heard of the Forest of Darkness and was only aware of its rough direction. That rough direction was the direction it had pointed towards and the direction that Xianxia was heading towards. Xianxia hesitated for a long time before he continued forward, because it was the same direction that Moku had given him. So it was probably correct. Since it was correct, then he had to continue forward. After he left Spirit Village, the miasma appeared again. He'd asked Moku about the miasma here, and Moku didn't know as well. Moku had merely said that for some unknown reason, a huge amount of miasma had appeared here from a very long time ago. Moreover, the source of the miasma was on the other side of Yellow Springs River. So he didn't know where the miasma came from. As for why Spirit Village wasn't filled with miasma, it was because the spirit race had set up a formation in the village, and it kept the miasma outside the village. Yellow Springs River. Actually, Xianxia was really curious about it. What exactly was on the other side of Yellow Springs River? After all, so many people were so afraid of it. He didn't know how strong Moku was, but he knew that Moku was definitely stronger than him. Otherwise, Moku wouldn't have been able to put him to sleep before he could even react. Even though he'd underestimated his opponent and had been taken by surprise, it was sufficient to prove Moku's strength. But even with Moku's strength, he was still so afraid of the other side of the river. It was the same for the middle-aged man who'd given Xianxia the dragon seal. That middle-aged man's strength was definitely extremely strong as well. However, the middle-aged man had still died. What exactly is on the other side? Xianxia was extremely curious. However, no matter how curious he was, he had no intention to go there and have a look. He didn't want to court death. However, he'd decided that once he grew stronger, he could travel through this place. Especially the other side of Yellow Springs River, he could take a look there. Of course, it was after he grew stronger. For example, after he attained the deity realm. If he attained the deity realm, then this place wouldn't be that dangerous anymore. Bang! 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 Suddenly, numerous explosions resounded from afar. A short while passed, and then numerous loud explosions rumbled incessantly like thunderclaps from afar. Xianxia was shocked. Someone got here? Suddenly, his expression changed slightly, because the explosions were rushing rapidly in his direction. Xianxia's figure flashed and vanished on the spot. Xianxia stared fixedly towards the distance while hiding in the shadows. The miasma there was suddenly blasted away by a strand of powerful force, and then a man and a beast appeared before Xianxia. The demon beast was huge. It had the body of a person, the head of a cow, and stood on 2 feet. Its entire body was covered in thick scale armor, and it held a huge black hammer in its grasp. Every single swing of its hammer caused the space around it to tremble violently. The demon beast's opponent was a man. The man was huge as well. Even though he seemed quite young, he weighed at least 150 kilograms. He looked very powerful, and he held a black rod in his grasp. Every single time his rod collided with the demon beast's hammer, a rumbling explosion would resound. Xianxia was quite shocked because the man was actually evenly matched with the demon beast. Who is he? Xianxia's gaze descended onto the fat man. He was really quite curious, because a human had been able to get here, and that was no simple feat. The man and beast were still fighting in midair. After fighting for a while, the demon beast suddenly raised its head and roared with fury. After that, a dome of dazzling black light suddenly erupted from its body. The dome had just appeared when it immediately started to shrink back, and then it covered the demon beast's body like a net of light. Once it was covered by the net of light, the demon beast's strength instantly rose explosively, and a single swing of its hammer instantly blasted the fat man around 10 kilometers back. Xianxia was quite surprised, but he came to an understanding just a moment later. Practically all demon beasts had their own innate divine abilities, and that included Eaglet and the others. However, there were limits to such abilities. The demon beast had clearly been infuriated by the fat man, and it had activated its ultimate move. Xianxia gazed at the fat man. The force of that attack had clearly been too terrifying. The fat man's fat was trembling violently, and it was quite a magnificent sight. Besides that, there was a trace of scarlet red on the corner of his mouth. Obviously, he'd been injured by that attack. The man wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth, and then he gazed at the demon beast. "Come! Continue fighting with your grandpa, sure." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure shot towards the demon beast. Once he arrived around 30 m away from the demon beast, he grabbed the rod with both hands and slammed it down. A wisp of viciousness flashed through the demon beast's eyes, and it roared furiously before raising its hammer and swinging it against the man's rod. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then both of them split apart in midair. The man moved around 1 kilometer back while the demon beast hadn't even been pushed 300 m back. But it didn't take long for the fat man to charge forward again. The shock in Xianxia's heart grew as he watched, because the man's strength had far exceeded his expectations. The demon beast's strength was much greater than Eaglet, Big Blackie, and the others. It could be said to merely be slightly weaker than the python. However, the man was actually able to collide head-on with it, and he was just a semi-deity. A semi-deity, not a deity. Is he one of the top 3 on the dragon rankings? Xianxia was quite curious. Even though the fat man was completely fearless in battle and charged forward repeatedly, he couldn't do anything because the demon beast was stronger than him. So he was blasted flying over and over again. In the end, Xianxia noticed that his entire arm was trembling violently. Obviously, it had definitely become completely numb. Under normal circumstances, humans were utterly incapable of resisting the physical strength of demon beasts. The fat man was very strong for being able to fight the demon beast to such an extent. After he was blasted flying again, the fat man didn't charge forward again, because the demon beast had charged at him, and then the fat man was constantly attacked and fell into a defensive state. The fat throughout his body was trembling violently under the frenzied attacks of the demon beast, and it seemed like oil would start spraying out from him. Needless to say, he was in quite a miserable state. He was completely suppressed in battle. However, he wasn't weak. Even though he was suppressed, he was still barely able to resist the demon beast. However, defeat was only a matter of time. Around 20+ breaths of time later, an explosion resounded before the fat man was blasted far away, and his blood sprayed incessantly through the air. Xianxia shook his head at the sight of this. If his blood continues spraying, then he'll probably lose all his blood. Suddenly, the fat man glanced at the surroundings and said, "Brother, stop hiding. Help me, and I'll be forever in your debt." Xianxia was stunned. He noticed my presence? It didn't take long for Xianxia to realize that the fat man merely knew that someone was here, and he didn't know Xianxia's exact location. Meanwhile, the fat man was blasted flying again, and he suddenly shouted loudly as his figure flew backwards. "1,000,000 divine crystals. Help me and I'll give you 1,000,000 divine crystals." Xianxia's eyelids twitched. He's that rich? It didn't take long for the fat man to be blasted away again. 2,000,000 divine crystals. The fat man shouted in midair. "Brother, I'll give you 2,000,000 divine crystals to save me." A moment of silence ensued, and then a voice resounded. 5,000,000! It was Xianxia's voice, of course. The fat man's face stiffened in midair, and then he laughed bitterly. "You're just taking advantage of the situation." Bang! As soon as the fat man finished speaking, he was blasted away again, and blood sprayed incessantly from his mouth as he flew through the air. Meanwhile, the demon beast charged at him again. The fat man's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly said, "Fine, 5,000,000. As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of light flashed. It was extremely fast and instantly arrived behind the demon beast. A wisp of viciousness flashed through the demon beast's eyes when it noticed the sword energy behind it, and then it turned around and slammed its hammer down. Boom! The ray of light was blasted into bits, and then Xianxia appeared before the fat man. The demon beast turned to look at Xianxia, and it was about to attack when Xianxia waved his right hand. Big Blackie and Little Blackie appeared in front of him. The demon beast's eyes instantly narrowed slightly when it saw the celestial demon wolves, and then it didn't attack. Meanwhile, a wisp of surprise flashed through the fat man's eyes. Obviously, he hadn't expected Xianxia to actually possess such powerful demon beasts. Xianxia gazed at the demon beast and spoke flatly, "Leave!" The demon beast stared at Xianxia while a trace of hesitation appeared in its eyes. Meanwhile, the demon wolves roared furiously into the air, and then they gazed at the demon beast with a ferocious glow in their eyes. The demon beast glanced at them, and then a wisp of ferocity flashed through its eyes as well. As soon as he saw that, Xianxia waved his hand and said, "Beat it up!" The demon wolves immediately leaped at the demon beast. Xianxia was quite surprised because that demon beast was actually not afraid of them, and it immediately charged at them. Is it going to fight too on its own? Xianxia was quite surprised. He was surprised by the demon beast's courage. Based on its aura, it was stronger than the demon wolves, but it was only slightly stronger. The joint forces of the demon wolves were definitely stronger than it. However, it dared to fight them. Its courage was commendable. Xianxia was even more shocked when he saw that it was actually not disadvantaged in the battle with the demon wolves. Its strength was really not bad. A wisp of excitement flashed through Xianxia's eyes, and then he waved his hand and summoned Eaglet. The demon beast's pupils constricted when it saw Eaglet, and then it intended to flee. Obviously, it was no fool. Could barely stand its ground against 2 opponents. But if it was 3 opponents, actually, it wouldn't fear fighting 3 of them. However, there were 2 humans at the side, so the demon beast fled decisively. Suddenly, Xianxia said, "Don't let it escape. Drag it back in." If it was a group of demon beasts, then he would naturally have to run on sight. However, it was just one demon beast. It was a demon beast on its own, and it was so strong. So wasn't that like a free subordinate for him? Even though the demon beast was strong, it couldn't fight against so many opponents. In the end, the fat man watched with astonishment as the demon beast was forcefully dragged into Xianxia's body. In the primordial pagoda, Big Blackie and the others released the demon beast. The demon beast was stunned for a moment, but it didn't take long for it to recover from its shock, and it glared angrily at Big Blackie and the others while roaring madly. However, it didn't attack. It didn't have to be a genius to know that it couldn't fight 3 other demon beasts. No, it was 4. Because a huge python that was comparable in size to a mountain was not too far away. Big Blackie and the others paid no attention to the demon beast, and the Emperor Python didn't pay any attention to it as well. All of them were looking at it and waiting to watch the show. They would naturally not warn it that it should keep a low profile. After all of them had suffered suppression from the primordial pagoda, so how can the newcomer be an exception? Sure enough, it had merely been roaring for a while when a wave of mysterious energy pressed down upon it. Bang! The demon beast was pressed flat on the ground. In the outside world, the fat man walked over to Xianxia, sized up Xianxia carefully, and spoke with curiosity in his voice. "Where did they go?" Xianxia didn't answer the fat man and stretched out his hand instead. The fat man glanced at Xianxia, and then passed a spatial ring to Xianxia. "There's 1,000,000 divine crystals in there. I didn't bring that much with me. Don't worry. Xianxia, am not someone who goes back on my word. Come to Stellar City and go to the Sure clan. They'll give you the balance." Xianxia took the spatial ring and glanced at the fat man. "Xianxia, the Sure clan. You're from the large world." He'd naturally heard of the Sure clan in Stellar City, and that Sure clan was from the large world. The fat man nodded and said, "That's right. Now, you probably won't think that I'll refuse to pay, right?" Xianxia nodded. Actually, he hadn't expected Xianxia to even be able to produce 5,000,000 divine crystals. After all, who would bring that much into this place? But he hadn't expected this fellow to be from the Sher clan. He didn't know how strong the Sher clan was, but he knew that it was absolutely terrifyingly wealthy. How much did the teleportation formations in Stellar City bring in every year? It was unimaginable. 5 million divine crystals was an astronomical figure to others, but it might be nothing to the Sher clan. Yang Yi nodded. All right, I'll go there to get it. Yang Yi naturally had an urgent need for divine crystals. Regardless of whether it was the Sword Alliance or Clouds of Heaven Stellar region, both of them needed a huge number of divine crystals. Yi Luyun could do a lot with 5 million divine crystals. Shi Tian smiled. I still don't know your name. Yang Yi didn't hide it from Shi Tian. Yang Yi. Yang Yi. Shi Tian blinked. That sword cultivator. Yang Yi? Yang Yi nodded. You've heard of me? Shi Tian had quite an unusual expression on his face. It's actually you, Yang Yi asked. What? Shi Tian replied. Did you offend that little devil in our large world? Right, the Divine Phoenix clan's Mo Shaoling. Mo Shaoling. Yang Yi nodded. I do have some enmity with her. Shi Tian shook his head. Brother, you could have offended anyone, but you just had to offend her. That little devil is really difficult to deal with. Do you know why I know your name? Because she has been telling everyone in the large world that she will give one of her divine flames to us if we kill you. Moreover, we can even cultivate in the Divine Phoenix clan's divine grounds of cultivation, Divine Spirit Cave. Besides that, she has named many other tempting rewards. Moreover, she seems to be adding more. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. She's really desperate to get me killed. However, no one is accepting her request. Meanwhile, Shi Tian added. Because that little devil has never kept her word. Even though her promises are tempting to the point that even I'm tempted, we're very well aware that she's very likely to be tricking us. It's not easy to get down here from the large world. So what if she doesn't keep her word after we kill you? Wouldn't we have done all of that for nothing? In any case, regardless of whether she does keep her word, we can't do anything to her. As soon as he finished speaking, he gazed at Yang Yi and sized him up. Actually, I'm lucky that I didn't agree to her request. Brother, you're not ordinary at all. You were able to get here, and you're even just a voider. No wonder that little devil promised such tempting rewards. She knew that it's difficult to kill you. Yang Yi smiled. Are there many geniuses in the large world? Shi Tian replied. Quite a huge amount. Yang Yi asked, how's your strength up there? Shi Tian thought for a moment and replied, not bad. There's quite a gap between me and those top geniuses. In overall, I'm high up in the middle class. Yang Yi nodded. He'd gained a rough estimate of the strengths of the geniuses in the large world. Meanwhile, Shi Tian suddenly asked, are you here to temper yourself? Yang Yi gazed at Shi Tian and replied with a question. You're here to temper yourself? Shi Tian shook his head. I came down here to deal with some business. I heard this place is very dangerous, so I decided to come and have a look. Damn it. I almost lost my life on numerous occasions. If I didn't have quite a few treasures and things to rely on, I would have died by now. No wonder my grandfather prohibited me from coming here. He's here to temper himself. The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched. He's really great. He actually treated the ominous territory as a place to temper himself. Meanwhile, Shi Tian patted Yang Yi on the shoulder. It was all thanks to you that I'm alive. I've finished all my life-saving treasures. And if it wasn't for you, I would have really died here. Shi Tian, will never forget this. Yang Ye's impression of Shi Tian grew slightly better, because he could sense that Shi Tian was being absolutely sincere when he spoke those words. Yang Yi shook his head. I didn't save you for nothing. I got 5 million divine crystals from you. So we don't owe each other anything. What are you talking about? Shi Tian was quite displeased. Is my life only worth 5 million divine crystals? In short, I'll never forget this kindness. If you get into trouble in the large world, then just use my name. There's nothing in the large world that I, Shi Tian, can't resolve. Yang Yi glanced at him and said, If I cause trouble, then it might not be a minor matter. Xianxia patted his chest and guaranteed. No matter what it is, I'll deal with it for you. Xianxia thought for a while before he replied. All right, I'll look for you if I cause trouble in the future. Xianxia cracked a smile and said, All right, this place is too dangerous. I'm heading back. What about you? Are you going to come with me? Xianxia shook his head. I have something else to do. I'll leave once I'm done. Xianxia nodded. You're quite mysterious. You should be able to protect yourself here, but I don't dare to stay longer. Brother Xianxia, until next time. As soon as he finished speaking, he was about to leave, but Xianxia suddenly asked, How did you notice my presence just now? Xianxia chuckled. A family secret. I'll tell you when we meet again. Take care. As soon as he finished speaking, he withdrew a scroll and crushed it, and then he transformed into a ray of light that vanished on the spot. Xianxia fell silent for a while, and then he shook his head. He's quite a nice guy. As soon as he finished speaking, he continued forward. This time, Xianxia sped up. He was quite impatient to get the spring of life now. Around 4 hours later. Splash! The sound of water suddenly came from beneath Xianxia's feet. Xianxia stopped, looked down and saw water below him. He hesitated for a moment and pushed his right hand forward. A wave of energy surged out and blasted the nearby miasma away. At this moment, Xianxia saw the surroundings clearly. It was a river that stood before him. The water in it was very clear, yet it seemed like a dead river that wasn't flowing at all. Xianxia fell silent for an instant, and he was just about to continue forward when he seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and it caused his hairs to stand on end. A river. This isn't Yellow Springs River, right? The more he thought about it, the more terrified he got. If this really was Yellow Springs River, then he couldn't continue forward. Even though he was confident in his strength, it was Yellow Springs River. Many people had warned him about it, so he couldn't disregard it. After all, those who were much stronger than him had never returned from the other side of Yellow Springs River. Even if someone did appear once more, that person was dead. Xianxia wasn't cowardly, but he had a clear understanding of his current strength. He was very strong in the eyes of ordinary deities, but that was only in the eyes of ordinary deities. Deities were everywhere in this place, and all of them were extremely strong. Simply speaking, the existences here weren't from the same era as him. One must always understand oneself. One should be aware of one's strength and capabilities. Otherwise, the consequences would be horrible. So, he had to figure out if it was Yellow Springs River. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings, and then released his aura. His aura was like a gale that swept towards the surroundings. It didn't take long for the miasma to be pushed back, and then an area of 3 kilometers with Xianxia at the center had been cleared up. At this moment, he saw the surroundings clearly. It wasn't a river. It was just a pool that covered an area of over 3 kilometers. Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief when he realized that it wasn't a river. If it was Yellow Springs River, then it represented that he'd gone the wrong way. Of course, that wasn't a big problem because he could just change directions. However, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have the chance to change directions. Even though he couldn't go to the other side of Yellow Springs River, who dared to guarantee that the river itself was devoid of danger? Fortunately, it was just a pool. Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief. However, the pool beneath his feet suddenly started to spin, and then a terrifying suction force shot up into the air and sucked him into the pool in an instant. The pool was calm once more. Beneath the pool, Xianxia's expression had changed drastically, and his sword intent and slaughter intent surged madly. However, they weren't able to stop the suction force. Xianxia was shocked, and he was about to draw his sword, but the suction force had vanished. Because he'd arrived at the bottom. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings. In the end, his gaze shot towards a spot not too far away from him. Because there was a door there. It has been so long since someone was able to get here. Suddenly, a voice came from behind the door. Come in. The voice was quite old and hoarse. That wasn't the most important point. The most important point was the door had swung open once the voice finished speaking. After that, the suction force appeared once more, and then Yang Yi was slowly sucked towards the door. At this moment, Yang Yi had calmed down. He was about to resist it when the voice resounded once more. "There's no need to resist it. I hold no ill intent towards you. If I did, you would be dead." As soon as the voice finished speaking, the suction force vanished. Yang Yi fell silent for a moment, and then he started walking towards the door. Flee? He could guarantee that if he did, then the suction force would definitely appear right away. He could resist it. After all, he had so many demon beasts in the primordial pagoda. So long as the person behind the door wasn't an expert beyond the deity realm, then he had the ability to fight back. However, he decided to see what the person behind the door wanted before deciding what he would do. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to walk through the door. A ray of white light flashed, and then Yang Yi felt dazed. But it didn't take long for him to return to normal. After that, the scene before him changed. At this moment, he was in a narrow chamber that was less than 30 m wide. The chamber was made from unknown ore, and it was covered in various golden symbols that Yang Yi had never seen in his life. Yang Yi withdrew his gaze and then looked ahead. A gray-robed old man was seated cross-legged there. The old man was very emaciated, and it wasn't exaggerated to call him a bag of bones. Because he was so thin, the old man's appearance seemed quite terrifying. Especially his eyes, his sockets seemed like that of a skeleton. The old man's hands were placed on his thighs, and they were bound by golden chains that were embedded in the wall behind the old man. He was imprisoned. The old man spoke abruptly. "It has been so long since someone has been able to get here." However, he didn't open his eyes. Yang Yi asked, "Senior, may I know who you are?" Yang Yi was secretly vigilant as he spoke. The old man replied, "You wouldn't know me even if I told you." Yang Yi nodded. Actually, it was obvious that the old man had lived for countless years. Even if the old man was once a peerless expert, Yang Yi would still know nothing about the old man. "I have to say, you're the first voider to get here." The old man continued, "Based on the direction you were heading towards, you're either going to the other side of Yellow Springs River or the Forest of Darkness." You should be heading to the Forest of Darkness." Yang Yi frowned. "How did you know?" The old man replied, "There's death energy on you. That proves that you're on the verge of death. Where else could you be going but the Forest of Darkness? You have quite the discerning eye." Yang Yi continued, "May I know why you brought me down here?" The old man replied, "I haven't spoken to anyone in a long time. I'm lonely, so I wanted to speak to someone." Yang Yi chuckled. "Senior, stop joking. I'm a very straightforward person, and I don't like to beat around the bush. So, please be frank." The old man fell silent for a long time, and then he said, "See, I've been trapped here for so many years. I just want to take a breath of fresh air in the outside world. I just have such a small wish. You can help me with it, right?" Yang Yi glanced at the golden chains around the old man's hands and feet, and then he shook his head. "Senior, you must be joking. Your strength is extraordinary, yet even you can't break open those chains, let alone me. Senior, you know that I'm a voider. While I'm comparatively stronger than those at the same realm of cultivation, but if I'm compared to Senior, I'll just avoid striking a blow to my own confidence." The old man said, "But I want to go outside. What should I do then?" Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why don't I get someone to save you? You're a really slippery fellow." The old man chuckled. "Would you even come back if I let you leave?" "I guarantee with my character." Yang Yi spoke seriously. "I'll definitely return." "Your character?" The old man said. "What's that? Can it fill my stomach?" Yang Yi gazed at the old man for a long time before he said, "Since you don't believe me, then tell me what we should do. If it's possible, I don't mind helping you. After all, it's an honor for me to have been able to meet an expert like you." Even though he'd said that, Yang Yi had started to become very vigilant. The old man said, "I have a way, but you have to cooperate." Yang Yi spoke flatly. "Do tell me about it." The old man explained, "I'm not an unreasonable person. I know your current strength really is insufficient to destroy the chains. However, while you can't do it now, you can in the future. Right? That's true. Xianxia nodded. All right, then I'll come back to save you once I've grown stronger. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia turned around and started walking away. However, the suction force appeared again, and then he couldn't take another step forward. The old man said, "Do you think I'm a fool?" Xianxia turned around and gazed at the old man. "Then what do you want?" The old man laughed coldly. "What if you don't come back? I'll be direct. Cultivate here until you're able to destroy the chains. Understand?" Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. "Cultivate here until I can save you?" The old man replied, "Yes." Xianxia fell silent for a long time, and then he said, "There's something I can't figure out. Your strength is far greater than mine. I think that even if I attain the deity realm, I'll probably still be inferior to you. But even you aren't able to break free from those chains. So, even if I attain the deity realm, it wouldn't help at all, right?" That was what he was most curious about. The old man's strength definitely surpassed his, and it had probably even surpassed the deity realm. However, even the old man couldn't break free from the chains. That was what he was most puzzled about. "No, you'll be able to break the chains once you attain the deity realm," the old man continued. "This place has been corroded for countless years, and it isn't as strong as it used to be. As for why I'm unable to do it myself, it isn't something you should be worried about. You should be worried about how you'll free me as soon as possible. Only once I'm free will you be able to gain freedom as well." Xianxia gazed at the old man for a long time, and then he said, "I only have around 2 months to live. Do you think I can attain the deity realm in that time?" "I forgot about that." The old man thought for a moment and said, "That's easy to resolve. Let's do this. Give me a strand of your soul, and then travel to the forest of darkness. Come back here once you've obtained the spring of life. In that we... Wait!" Xianxia suddenly interrupted the old man. "You want me to give you a strand of my soul?" The old man replied, "What? You're unwilling. Fuck you." Xianxia was instantly visibly furious. "You old dog. You think you're so great." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia's profound energy surged madly into the ancient sheath, and then he drew his sword and swung it. 2 overlapped heaven rends. Xianxia hadn't wanted to cause trouble, but in the end, he noticed that even if he didn't want to cause trouble, trouble still came looking for him. The old man was trying to take a yard when given an inch and actually wanted a strand of his soul. This made Xianxia's temper flare. If he helped the old man, it was out of kindness. If he refused, it was his right. But the old man wanted to force him. That was intolerable. A ray of sword energy flashed through the chamber, and it instantly arrived before the old man. The old man suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were muddy, dim, and lifeless. At this moment, there was a trace of shock in them. Obviously, he hadn't expected Xianxia to be able to execute such a terrifying attack. If it was in the past, then such an attack would be nothing to him. Yet now, the old man didn't think too much about it. He pressed his palms over each other and swiftly pushed them forward. Bang! A deafening explosion resounded in the chamber. Countless strands of energy swept madly towards the surroundings. However, regardless of whether it was the energy from Xianxia's attack or the old man's attack, both of them instantly vanished without a trace upon coming into contact with the walls of the chamber. A few moments later, the surroundings returned to calm. The old man was still there. Xianxia stared at the old man, and there was a solemn expression in his eyes, because the old man had forcefully endured 2 overlapped heaven rends, and the old man seemed completely unharmed. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly said, "That sword of yours and that sword technique are really not bad." Xianxia was about to speak when the old man added, "However, I have an even stronger sword technique. Want to learn it?" "No!" Xianxia turned around and walked away once he finished speaking. "Young man, don't be rash." Meanwhile, the old man added, "After all, rashness never ends well." Xianxia paid no attention to the old man and just continued forward. The old man was strong, much stronger than him, and he had no doubt about that. However, he wasn't afraid. because the old man was clearly unable to utilize his full strength. It was very difficult for him to kill the old man, but the old man could definitely not stop him if he wanted to leave. The old man suddenly said, "It's a sword technique that uses the body as the sword, the heart as the foundation, intent as speed, the soul as the support, the eyes as the blade. The sword is me, and I'm the sword. It's a sword technique that can destroy the 5 elements and slash through yin and yang. When cultivated to the limit, it can even sever the past and present. In other words, it can sever the cycle of reincarnation and karma." This time, Xianxia stopped, and then he turned around to gaze at the old man. "Is it stronger than the technique I just executed?" "It's much stronger," the old man continued. "That technique of yours possessed sufficient strength, and it can destroy the 5 elements, but it can't slash through yin and yang, nor can it sever past and present. It's impossible even if you overlap 1,000 of them, because destroying the 5 elements is its limit. The reason I say that it has such a limit is because the person who created that technique had definitely not comprehended yin, yang, and rebirth. So, the limit of that technique is only at destroying the 5 elements. Yin, yang, and rebirth?" Xianxia frowned. He'd heard of this on more than one occasion, especially the concept of reincarnation and rebirth. He hadn't thought about it because it was too far away from him, and his main goal for now was to do well in his current lifetime. The old man pondered deeply for a moment, and then he said, "Let me give you a simple explanation. The deity realm is divided into 3 levels. The 5-element deity realm, yin and yang, and the cycle of reincarnation. For the 5 elements, they comprehend time and the rules of the 5 elements. So, they belong in the level of the 5 elements. If they comprehend yin and yang, then they rise a level higher and attain the dualism deity realm. The realm above it is the rebirth deity realm." Xianxia asked, "They all belong to the deity realm?" The old man shook his head. "That was the case an extremely long time ago. Yet now, the dualism realm and rebirth realm don't belong to the deity realm. So, the dualism realm is above the deity realm, and the rebirth realm is above the dualism realm." Xianxia nodded. "That sword technique you just spoke of was created by a rebirth realm expert?" "No," the old man said. "It was a sword cultivator at the dualism realm who'd spent over 1,000 years to create it. He created this technique to kill rebirth realm experts." "To kill rebirth realm experts?" Xianxia frowned. Couldn't he have just cultivated to the rebirth realm? Did he have nothing better to do than to waste over 1,000 years on researching a technique? Attain the rebirth realm? The old man shook his head. "It's easy for you to say. You don't even know how difficult it is to cultivate to the rebirth realm. Because attaining the rebirth realm requires one to enter the cycle of reincarnation. Of course, it doesn't mean you have to take your own life and get reincarnated. It's to send your consciousness into the cycle of reincarnation to temper itself and comprehend rebirth. You know, many dualism realm experts have fallen into eternal slumber because they failed to comprehend rebirth, and their consciousnesses remained within the world of reincarnation. Besides that, some willingly allow themselves to be immersed in the world of reincarnation and are unwilling to return to reality. In short, it's very, very, very difficult to attain the rebirth realm. It's far away from me." Xianxia spoke indifferently. "Tell me about that sword cultivator. I'm quite curious about that person." The old man said, "That sword cultivator was an extraordinary genius. He wanted to take revenge, but his enemy was at the rebirth realm. However, the gap between the dualism realm and rebirth realm is too great. Even 100 dualism realm experts can't shake a single rebirth realm expert. Moreover, he was very clearly aware that he had an extremely slim chance of attaining the rebirth realm. He didn't want to take the risk. It wasn't because he was afraid of death, and he was just afraid he wouldn't be able to take revenge. So, he decided to create a technique which could kill rebirth realm experts. In the end, he succeeded. Just one swing of his sword. He used just a single swing of the sword to kill a rebirth realm expert." Xianxia hurriedly asked, "Are there any side effects?" He knew that powerful techniques usually had side effects. "It depends on the user," the old man continued. He didn't suffer from any side effects when he utilized it that day. But if you utilize it, then the side effects might be really strong. After all, your strength isn't equal to his. I'm sure you're aware that utilizing a force that surpasses your own strength will definitely make you suffer a certain amount of backlash. It's just as I expected. Xianxia nodded and said, "Why is that sword technique in your possession?" "Because he was an old friend of mine," the old man continued. "Once he killed his enemy, he had no further reason to live. So, he gave me the technique and asked me to find a good sword cultivator to inherit it." Xianxia gazed at the old man for a long time and then he said, "Give it to me, and I'll come save you once I grow stronger." The old man spoke indifferently. "Do you think I'm an idiot? Then just keep it and continue waiting." As soon as Xianxia finished speaking, he didn't hesitate to turn around and walk away. He was tempted by the sword technique, but he hadn't lost his mind. The old man's strength wasn't ordinary. If he were to release the old man, then forget about obtaining the sword technique, even his survival would be a problem. The old man suddenly said, "Wait!" Xianxia stopped, and then he turned to look at the old man. "What?" The old man said, "I can only give it to you after you've released me." Xianxia shook his head. "I can't free you right now. As I've said before, give it to me, and I'll naturally come to save you once I possess sufficient strength." The old man replied, "What if you don't return?" Xianxia looked the old man in the eyes. "Do you have another choice?" "No, you don't. You can only choose to trust me. Of course, you can choose to stay here and wait. You can wait until someone else passes by, and then you can drag that fellow down here. Right? I think the day will come when a person you drag down here will be able to save you." The old man gazed at Xianxia for a long time before he said, "Come back and free me within 3 years. Swear with your soul that you'll definitely save me within 3 years from now." Xianxia fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "5 years. I'm confident in being able to do so if I'm given 5 years." Both of them looked each other in the eye for a long time. In the end, the old man said, "Fine, 5 years. I'll wait 5 years for you." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand, and a scroll appeared in front of Xianxia. Xianxia didn't fear it at all and immediately opened it. It didn't take long for the scroll to transform into a ray of light that entered his forehead. Xianxia naturally wasn't afraid that the old man would play tricks on him. He had the primordial pagoda, so he didn't have to fear anything that entered his body. It didn't take long for some information to appear in his mind. A long time passed before Xianxia opened his eyes, and he said, "Who can stop my sword? I'll sever your path to rebirth with one swing." The name of the sword technique was Sword of Rebirth. Sword of Rebirth carried 2 meanings. Firstly, it could kill experts at the rebirth realm. Secondly, it could destroy a person's path towards reincarnation. In other words, anyone killed by this technique couldn't be reincarnated. Besides that, it could sever karma and cycle of reincarnation. Another formidable sword cultivator. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. The sword technique allowed him to discern how terrifying that sword cultivator was, and that sword cultivator's attainments in the sword Dao were probably not inferior to Jian Wuji and the Unfettered One. However, it did make sense. The world was so huge, and there were so many sword cultivators, so it was absolutely normal for there to be a few peerless sword cultivators. Xianxia restrained his thoughts and gazed at the old man. 5 years. I'll come save you in 5 years. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia turned around and started walking away. However, he hadn't even taken 2 steps when he stopped again. And then he turned around to gaze at the old man. Senior, do you have other powerful techniques or treasures? In any case, you have no use for them right now, so why don't you give them to me?" The old man gazed at Xianxia for a long time and then he said, "I do have many, but my memory is quite bad, so I can't remember most of them. I think that I should remember some once you return." "I understand." Xianxia nodded. He didn't waste his breath again, and he intended to leave. However, the old man suddenly said, "Kid, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't go past Yellow Springs River. I don't want to wait for the next person that gets here." Xianxia asked, "What is on the other side of that river?" The old man shook his head slightly. I don't know, because those who do know are dead. The ominous territory is a forbidden area for your world. However, that place is the forbidden area of the ominous territory. The forbidden area in the ominous territory. The forbidden area of the ominous territory. Xianxia hadn't expected the ominous territory to actually have a forbidden area, and it was on the other side of Yellow Springs River. What is that place? Xianxia grew even more curious. After all, the old man had definitely surpassed the deity realm. Even though the old man was a deity right now, he had definitely surpassed the deity realm in the past. However, even he was filled with fear towards that place. So, it was obvious how terrifying the other side of the river was. What is over there? Xianxia didn't ask it out aloud, because he knew that he wouldn't get an answer. Just as the old man had said, those who knew were dead. Xianxia restrained his thoughts, glanced at the old man and said, There's something I'm curious about. Why are you imprisoned here? The old man fell silent for a short while, and then he said, Greed is an original sin. Greed is an original sin. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. The village leader of Spirit Village had told him the same thing. What does it mean? Xianxia was about to ask when the old man waved his hand. Go on. There are many things that you don't need to know. As soon as he finished speaking, his eyes closed slowly. Xianxia didn't ask another question when he saw that. Xianxia just nodded, and then he vanished on the spot. Once Xianxia left, the old man suddenly opened his eyes, and he took a long look at the direction Xianxia had vanished towards before he said, How unusual! As soon as he finished speaking, he closed his eyes slowly. Xianxia left the area beneath the pool, and then he looked down into the pool for a long time before he finally turned around and left. Since he started going deep into the ominous territory, he'd met too many formidable demon beasts and strange people. For example, Little Sky, the middle-aged man who'd give him the dragon seal, the spirit race, and that old man from before. Not only did they possess formidable strength, every single one of them was extremely mysterious. Who were they? Why were such formidable existences like them imprisoned in this place? What exactly was the ominous territory? He wanted to know so much, but he had no answers. Moreover, he had no time to think about all of that now. The important matter at hand was to get to the forest of darkness and obtain the spring of life. If he could obtain it smoothly, then he really wouldn't have come here for nothing. After all, while his journey had been filled with horror, he'd obtained a huge number of treasures as well. The only thing he found comparatively regrettable was that he didn't have any time to cultivate all the techniques he'd obtained. Even the Sword of Rebirth couldn't be helped. He didn't dare to let himself enter the primordial pagoda and concentrate on cultivating while he remained in this place. After all, if any mishap were to occur, then his actions would have been equivalent to courting death. Moreover, the spring of life was more important when compared to all of that. So, he could only put them aside for now. If he didn't have the spring of life, then all of them would be useless. His life was the most important. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings. He was about to continue on his journey, but he seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly sat down cross-legged, and then he immersed his consciousness into his body. The demon beast. That demon beast which Big Blackie and the others had dragged into the primordial pagoda. He'd almost forgotten about it. In the primordial pagoda. At this moment, that demon beast had been brought to the verge of death by the primordial pagoda. It seemed to be quite miserable. Xianxia didn't waste his breath and just walked over to it. Submit to me or die. It was simple and direct. He didn't have the time to waste on it. What if it refused? That wasn't a problem. He could come and ask again. In any case, the primordial pagoda would be there to play with it. Demon beasts were proud beings, and this demon beast was no exception. A ferocious glow instantly appeared in its eyes when it heard Xianxia. If it wasn't for the fact that it was utterly devoid of strength, it would have definitely attacked. Big Blackie and the others shook their heads when they witnessed this scene. They knew that fellow was going to suffer. As expected, Xianxia turned around and left. At the same time, a strand of mysterious energy slammed against the demon beast. Bang! A shrill cry resounded from it, and then it started shivering while lying flat on the ground. Yang Yi paid no attention to it and he just returned to the outside world. He had no time to waste on it. He didn't care if it refused because he had the primordial pagoda to deal with it. In any case, it couldn't escape. After quite some time passed, Yang Yi suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. There was a moon hanging high up in the sky. The moon? Yang Yi frowned. How could I possibly be able to see the moon here? He glanced at the surroundings. Sure enough, he noticed that the miasma in the surroundings had actually become quite scarce. At this moment, the miasma was very thin like smoke, and it didn't affect his vision at all. He noticed that he was in a plain, an endless plain that was very wide. What is this place? Why is there no miasma here? Yang Ye's brows were still pressed tightly together. This place was quite unusual, so he didn't dare to act carelessly. Screech! Yang Yi remained silent for an instant, and he was about to leave when a sharp cry resounded from the sky. It sounded like metal scraping against each other, and it was extremely ear-piercing. Yang Yi was caught off guard by it, and his eardrums were instantly cracked by it, causing threads of blood to seep out from his ears. Yang Yi was shocked, and he hurriedly released his sword intent to cover himself in layers. After that, he looked up into the sky. He was shocked as soon as he did that. There was a huge bird in the air, and it blotted out the sky above. The bird was completely pitch black, and its presence had instantly concealed the entire sky. It didn't take long for the huge bird to arrive before Yang Yi. It didn't stop and just continued towards the distance. However, right when it passed above Yang Yi, it suddenly looked down and shot a glance at Yang Yi. Yang Ye's expression changed slightly because the bird had actually noticed his presence. Yang Yi didn't flee and just met the bird's gaze. There was indifference, complete and utter indifference in the bird's eyes. It was like a human looking down at an ant. It didn't take long for the bird to withdraw its gaze and continue towards the distance. Yang Yi shrugged. Even though he really didn't like the bird's gaze, he couldn't do anything about it. After all, he couldn't run over to the bird and fight it, right? Based on its aura, it was definitely much stronger than the ancient Emperor Python, and it was probably just slightly inferior to Xianxia. If he were to fight it on his own, if he was honest about it, then he would really not be a match for the bird. So that was why the bird had looked at him like that and even disregarded him. But that was exactly what Yang Yi wanted. He didn't want to get into any unnecessary trouble. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts and continued forward. Now, no matter what he saw here, he wouldn't be shocked as he had been in the beginning. In any case, anything that appeared here was normal to him. Around 2 hours later, Yang Yi suddenly stopped and stared fixedly at the area ahead. There was a wisp of excitement and happiness in his eyes, because a thick forest was standing not too far away from him. A dense expanse of ancient trees filled his field of vision. The trees there possessed extraordinary height, and every single one of them was at least around 300 m tall. The Forest of Darkness? Yang Yi wasn't very sure if it was the Forest of Darkness. However, he felt that it probably was. However, he still had to confirm it. He glanced at the surroundings, and then he vanished on the spot. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to enter the forest. As soon as he did, he had the feeling that he was tiny. At this moment, he felt extremely tiny because the trees around him were too tall. Even the fallen leaves on the ground around him were much larger than him. This is probably the Forest of Darkness, right? Yang Yi muttered in his heart. He wasn't very sure if this place was the Forest of Darkness. After all, it was his first time here. He'd asked Big Blackie and the others, but they were similarly uncertain because they hadn't been here as well. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and continued forward into the depths of the forest. All along the way, Yang Ye's profound energy was surging within him as he secretly kept his guard up. He was quite afraid that some monster would suddenly jump out from the shadows and catch him off guard. Such an incident was entirely possible in this place, so he couldn't relax at all. However, Yang Yi was quite surprised because, not to mention a demon beast, he hadn't even encountered a mosquito all along the way. It was quiet, extremely quiet. It was very unusual. Suddenly, Yang Yi frowned, and he looked up into the distance. A moment of silence ensued. Suddenly, the entire ground started to tremble violently, and then all sorts of demon beasts swarmed out from afar. There were numerous demon beasts, and they were of all types. They seemed like they'd gone mad and were rushing in his direction. Xianxia's expression changed at the sight of this, and he hurriedly merged himself into the shadows of a tree. Fortunately, the demon beasts seemed to be in a rush, and they hadn't noticed him. Xiangxia observed them carefully. All of them were extremely strong, and there were many different types of demon beasts amongst them. Moreover, most of them were demon beasts that he'd never seen in the past. Xiangxia noticed that all of them had a trace of anxiousness and fear in their eyes. Is something chasing after them? Xiangxia frowned. That isn't very likely. All of them are comparable to deities. Moreover, there are so many of them. What could possibly make them flee like they've gone mad? Once all the demon beasts had fled, Xiangxia continued forward. Regardless of whether it was the forest of darkness, and regardless of what terrifying existence was up ahead, Xiangxia had to continue forward. As far as he was concerned, if he couldn't succeed, then he would die. All along the way, demon beasts were ceaselessly emerging from deep within the forest. It wasn't just on the ground. It was the same in the air. All of them seemed to be afraid of something, and they were fleeing madly towards the direction which he'd entered the forest from. This made an even more solemn expression appear on Xiangxia's face. At this moment, he was practically certain that something had definitely happened further ahead. Or perhaps there was some sort of extremely terrifying existence there that aroused extreme fear in them. Otherwise, the demon beasts wouldn't have lost their composure like that and flee the forest like they'd gone mad. At this moment, Xiangxia thought of the huge bird he'd encountered earlier. If that huge bird had been fleeing as well. Suddenly, Xiangxia restrained his thoughts and looked towards the distance. A figure was rushing swiftly in his direction. It was truly too swift, and it was so swift that the figure was already around 3 kilometers behind him right after he saw it. It was so swift that he hadn't even been able to see the figure's appearance. However, it didn't take long for the figure to turn back abruptly, and then it appeared before Xiangxia. Xiangxia's eyes instantly opened wide when he saw the person's appearance. You! It's you! Who was the person before him? It was that masked saber-wielding woman that Xiangxia had met at the entrance of Ominous City. At that time, she'd almost killed him in an instant, so she'd left a rather deep impression on him. But he hadn't expected to meet her here. She'd gone deep into the ominous territory as well. It's you! There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. Obviously, she too hadn't expected to meet Xiangxia here. Xiangxia asked, "What are you doing here?" She replied with a question, "What are you doing here?" Xiangxia replied, "I came to look for something." She replied, "I came to look for inheritances." Xiangxia glanced at her. Needless to say, he'd underestimated her strength. After all, she was clearly not ordinary since she could get here on her own. Xiangxia restrained his thoughts and asked, "I saw you running over from that direction. There were also numerous demon beasts coming from there. Did something happen there?" She shook her head slightly. "I don't really know, because I didn't go deep, nor am I able to do so. There are too many demon beasts there. It's very easy to be discovered." When she spoke up to this point, she gazed at Xiangxia and said, "Your skill in concealment is extremely formidable. Even I almost failed to discover your presence." Xiangxia asked, "Then how did you?" He was quite curious about how she'd discovered his presence. However, she shook her head. "I can't tell you." Xiangxia shrugged. "One more question. Is this the forest of darkness?" "I don't know," she continued. "Even though I've entered the ominous territory in the past, I've never gone deep. This is my first time coming here, and it may be my last. It's too dangerous here. Based on your current strength, if you insist on going further, then it's very likely that you won't be able to come back." She gazed at Xiangxia and continued, "I was only able to get here due to certain reasons, but I never expected that you would be able to get here. Looks like you're much stronger than I expected. Let's fight if we have the chance in the future." Xiangxia replied, "We can spar if we have the chance." Xiangxia was very willing to spar with experts, because he would be able to determine what he lacked and improve himself. This woman before him was the strongest saber cultivator he'd met. Her saber was too sharp and swift, especially its speed. Even he feared it. She nodded slightly. If you intend to go further, then let me give you a piece of advice. Don't. Even though I don't know what those demon beasts fear so strongly to the point of leaving their territory, I have no doubt that it is absolutely not something you or I can fight right now. Xianxia smiled. I appreciate your good intentions, but I'm still going to continue forward. She glanced at him and nodded slightly. Good luck. Xianxia asked, Are you leaving right now? She shook her head. I'm going to look around. This place is extremely dangerous, but it's filled with fortune as well. So I've decided to look around. Unless I encounter an extraordinarily powerful demon beast, ordinary demon beasts can't keep up with my speed. Right? Xianxia nodded. She was absolutely swift. Could be said that he couldn't compete with her speed at all. Now, he understood why she was able to get here. Besides her formidable strength, the other factor that supported her success was her speed. If she decided to flee, then perhaps only Xianxia could catch up to her. Meanwhile, she said, I have other business to attend to, so I'll be bidding farewell now. Xianxia nodded. Farewell. She nodded slightly, and then she vanished on the spot. She was 30 kilometers away when her figure appeared once more. She was so swift that her figure couldn't be seen clearly. Even Xianxia couldn't. Xianxia gazed at the direction she vanished towards, and a long time passed before he shook his head. Looks like I have to work on my speed. Speed was definitely beneficial. It allowed one to both attack and retreat. Xianxia restrained his thoughts. He was about to continue forward before he suddenly closed his eyes, and then his clone appeared in the primordial pagoda. Xianxia's clone arrived before the demon beast that was still being suppressed by the primordial pagoda. At this moment, there was another figure by its side, and it was Little Sky, of course. A ferocious glow instantly appeared in the heavily injured demon beast's eyes when it saw Xianxia. However, it didn't take long for the ferocity to vanish and be replaced by fear. Xianxia paid no attention to it and gazed at Little Sky instead. Because it was Little Sky who'd asked him to come here. She walked over to him and spoke softly. Can you stop bullying them? They are quite pitiful. Xianxia glanced at her and said, Little Sky, tell me the truth. Are you a demon beast? Actually, he'd had such suspicions from the beginning, because all the demon beasts gave her face. Moreover, she was really protective of them. So, he suspected that she was a demon beast. Little Sky shook her head. I don't know what race I'm from. Xianxia felt speechless. Meanwhile, Little Sky walked over to the demon beast and patted it lightly on the head. It's fine. Just stay with him for 5 years. Once 5 years have passed, you'll regain your freedom. Moreover, even though he's cursed by the heavens, he possesses great karmic luck. Staying with him might bring fortune to you. The demon beast glanced at Xianxia, glanced at Little Sky, and then didn't hesitate to nod and display its agreement. Xianxia couldn't help but take a deep and long glance at Little Sky. They really do give her so much face. At this moment, Xianxia wanted to drag Xianxia in here and see if Xianxia would give her face. Unfortunately, Xianxia was absorbing the energy from the demonic dragon and couldn't show himself for now. Just like that, the demon beast submitted to Xianxia with Little Sky's help. Even though it was just for 5 years, as far as Xianxia was concerned, it was enough. Because the demon beast had the head of a cow and the body of a person, Xianxia gave it a name which he felt really suited the demon beast, Little Cow. With Little Cow addition to the group, Xianxia had a total of 6 demon beasts if Xianxia was included. If he was included in the group, then their forces could even go against 30 deities. Because both Little Cow and the ancient Emperor Python could fight 3 deities on their own. As for Xianxia, it was obvious that he could fight more. Based on Xianxia's current strength, even fighting 5 deities wouldn't be a problem for him. It could be said that he'd gained greatly on his trip to the ominous territory. Of course, it would be perfect if he could obtain the Spring of Life. If he failed, then it was very likely that everything he gained would be useless. If he was dead, then what was the point of the treasures and demon beasts he'd gathered? The Spring of Life. Xianxia opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and continued forward. All along the way, there were more demon beasts running out from deep within the forest. Yang Yi was extremely shocked by the sight of them, because deities really were everywhere. It could be said that if the people and demon beasts here could leave, then even the joint forces of the entire lower dimensions would definitely be unable to resist them. Because up until now, practically every single demon beast he'd encountered was one that had attained its strength through hard work and without relying on any external forces. Based on his estimations, perhaps only the large world could fight against the ominous territory. Even though the ominous territory was very terrifying and even had that unknown area beyond Yellow Springs River, the large world couldn't be underestimated. After all, Nether Maiden and the others were from there. Moreover, he hadn't met the Nether Pavilion's eldest sister and second sister. However, their strengths were definitely capable of destroying worlds. But there were powers on par with the Nether Pavilion within the large world. Besides that, how extraordinary was Jian Wuji. However, he wasn't unmatched in the large world. He could only be considered to be the strongest sword cultivator in his generation. It was obvious how powerful the powers of the large world were. However, the ominous territory wasn't ordinary as well. So, it was impossible to know if the ominous territory or the large world was stronger. After all, they hadn't collided. As Yang Yi traveled deeper into the forest, fewer and fewer demon beasts were running in his direction. In the end, he only saw a few demon beasts every hour. Yang Ye's gaze burned with desire when he saw them, because if he could send them into the primordial pagoda, then he could form an army of demon beasts. However, he didn't dare to do that. If he created a huge commotion here, then he might be besieged. After continuing forward for another 2 hours, Yang Yi didn't see another demon beast. He couldn't help but reveal a solemn expression at this point. He slowed down and remained vigilant at all times. He had a bad feeling. At this point, the bad feeling he had was growing strong and stronger. Suddenly, Yang Yi stopped and listened attentively. Thump! Thump! Soft thumps were coming from far away. It sounded like footsteps. They started soft, but they gradually grew louder. Moreover, Yang Yi noticed that the ground had started to tremble slightly. It didn't take long for it to grow much louder. Around 10 breaths of time later, the entire ground was shaking violently. Moreover, even the trees in the surroundings were shaking intensely. Countless leaves were raining down from them. At the same time, the soft thumping reverberated like thunderclaps. Every single one was deafening. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly while an extremely solemn expression appeared on his face. What exactly is over there? Yang Yi remained silent for a moment, and then he had the intention to retreat. His intuition told him that regardless of what was far ahead in the distance, it was definitely not something he could deal with. So he should avoid it for now. Right when Yang Yi was about to retreat, a hoarse voice came from afar. Sword, sword, sword. Sword? Yang Yi was stunned. What? Suddenly, Yang Yi looked ahead. He seemed to have seen something, and it caused his eyes to open wide. Don't scare me like that.